Hey, this is Stephen Ament. Welcome to my Exorcism.io series. In this video, I will be working through the matrix exercise from the Ruby track. So for this exercise, what we need to do is we're going to be given a string representing a matrix of numbers. And we need to be able to return the rows and the columns of that matrix. Okay, so let's dive right in. Matrix. Let me open up my testing pane here. Great. All right, I'm going to start by running the test. It's going to fail because there's no file. Let's create that. Matrix.rb. And then we'll fail because we have no matrix class. Matrix. So initialize does not accept any argument. So let's go ahead and create our initialize method to accept a string that we will call matrix. So let's see what this gives us here. All right, it fails because we have undefined method rows. So let's go ahead and define that. Undefined method. Okay, yeah, so we're returning nil, and it expects an array. If we do this, there we go, expected 1 and 2. Actual is 1. Okay, wait a second. What are we looking at here? Okay, so this needs to be a double. It needs to be, yeah, that's what we're going to return right there. Obviously, this isn't the functionality that we really need it to be. As soon as we introduce a second test, we're going to be forced to implement something of the rows functionality now. All right, so what do we got? We're being passed in this string, and let's go ahead and make sure we have a string here. We want to split it into rows, and each row is going to be itself an array of numbers. So let's just step through this and get this working. So in the first place, we want to split on new lines, right? That's going to give us our rows. But then for each individual row, we want each one to also be split on white space, and we want each of those to be converted to an integer. So we're going to do that in a couple of steps. Split here will give us an array, and then we want to do something to each element in the array that gives us something else. So that right away tells me I want to map over my array. And so let's do a long version of it here. This is a row. I want to split the row, right? I want to split the row. And then for each of those elements in the subarray, I want to 2i it. So I think this is going to give me what I need. Let's just run it and make sure I haven't screwed anything up. Okay, so we actually need to save this, and then let's return that. There we go. Those both pass now. So in a case like this, where I have a method that simply returns an instance variable, rather than defining that like that, we want to use the Ruby adder reader for rows, and that's going to hook that up. There we go. That's going to work. So let's continue on. I believe this next test is going to pass just like that. Next text is going to pass just like that. And here's where we're going to run into our next failure when we try to extract a column. Boom. There is no method columns. So what do I do here? Can I do the same thing? I can, but it's gonna fail because we're returning nil, and it expects it to be, again, an array of arrays. That's what it's expecting. So, we can just do this, and the values are not going to match. So let's not mess with that. Let's go ahead and implement the functionality we need here. So let's think about this. We have rows split up into an array of arrays. So what is columns? Columns needs to be an array of arrays, but with each element that already exists in our rows array transposed into a different position here. So how would you even go about doing this in the first place? Well, let's go ahead and create a transpose method array here. Transpose array method that takes rows and it's going to return columns. And just to let you know, there's actually going to be an easier way for us to do this, but I want to understand what we need to do and how we would more or less brute force this before I show you the cool Ruby shortcut. Let's start our method here, array, and this takes an array. And what we're going to need to do is put a loop inside of a loop. Okay, so I want to start here by creating an empty array for columns. I want a variable I that is 0, and while I is less than rows first size, okay, we're going to loop inside of here. And let's see, j is equal to 0 inside of here. Let's begin with columns I is equal to an empty array, okay, while j is less than rows dot size. What we're going to do is columns I, we want to add rows j I. We want to add 1 to j inside of here. We want to add 1 to I inside of here. And then we want to return columns. This might not be the most elegant solution here, but let's just see if it gets what we need. And hey, it works. So that's cool. So do you understand what we did? We have two loops corresponding, or two counters corresponding to the size, the number of columns and the number of rows in the rows array. We loop through each row of the rows array, taking the first column, and we add that to the first row of the columns array, each of those elements. And then we look at the second column, the third column, and what we've effectively done is converted our array of rows into our array of columns. And I think this is actually probably gonna work from here on out. Now there might be some, this code is making some assumptions about what I have inside of rows, that I've got actual arrays for each of these values. That's a big assumption based on what I was passed in. But maybe that's a fair assumption to make. Maybe there's something we can do up here to ensure that rows is actually an array of arrays. It also assumes that it's a true matrix that we've been given, that each of the rows is the same length. We don't know that for sure. But anyway, I promised you that I would have an easier way to do this for you, but I wanted to show you actually how you would do it first. And indeed, I do have an easier way to do this. Let's go back here. Let's look. Whoops. Let us open up the documentation for the array. How about for array? I almost gave it away there. And take a look at the methods here, the instance methods, and we're looking for something that does what we want it to do. And I came here and I saw, aha, there's a transpose method. What does that do? So let's look at the documentation for that. Here we are, array transpose. It assumes that the self is an array of arrays and transposes the rows and the columns. And look at the example they give there. A is an array of arrays, a.transpose. That's exactly what we want it to do. In this case, they've handled that situation. If the length of the subarrays don't match, an index error is raised. Okay, so let's do that. And all of our tests should pass. Ta-da, look at that. That's pretty clean. I'm going to submit that as my first solution. Matrix.rb. Okay. Let's pause, and we'll pick up the refactoring in part 2.